So I think it's the same response for both. Through a series of serendipitous events, I've stumbled into working on the issue of migrants and cities. So I'm really intrigued and I enjoy working on this question because it's not just about how migrants access services or infrastructure or housing, but it's also about how they forge a sense of community or a sense of belonging in the city. So there's a lot of like hopeful content here because people are trying to improve their lives, and you really can study that process. It's also intrinsic to urbanization. I mean, throughout history, cities have grown by taking people in, so it sort of speaks to that larger issue of how cities are formed and how they grow. But it's also a big challenge, especially in today's sort of post globalization moment where there's largely an anti-immigrant political stance across the world, whether we're talking about internal migrants or global migrants or climate migrants. So it's an intriguing policy problem where you need people, migrants, to do certain kinds of work, but you also don't really want them for reasons of identity and history and politics. So that's the area that I work on and that I probably will continue to work on for some time. I work on internal migration in India. So obviously, during the COVID-19 pandemic, this became a topic that a lot of people were really interested in. So the first finding, perhaps not surprising, but definitely very clear, was that the larger public, as well as the policy ecosystem, needed the pandemic to see what had been right under their noses all the time, that, our countries, a lot of economic processes are dependent on large scale unorganized labor and forms of labor exploitation. So that was the first finding that me and a lot of people at that point were highlighting. And the second finding that I really wanted to focus on, that despite the panic induced by this mass exodus of migrants away from locations of employment, uh, migrants that we were economically dependent on, uh, bureaucrats, experts, civil society folks largely continued to support and believe in the idea of sedentarism, that is, that people should stay in place and not migrate. So they continue to support the idea that policy should support people to stay where they are rather than play a role in actually helping them migrate, that they should keep people in their places of origin. And this is actually very antithetical to what research has shown, that migration has been a great avenue for prosperity and social mobility across the world and across time. So this was really an interesting finding when we studied all of the policies and all of the conversations, parliamentary debates that happened about migration during COVID. At a time when India is sort of at one hand finding avenues to increase the export of labor to other countries, it's ironical that policies about internal migration continue to sort of focus on keeping migrants in the villages at a time when the country should be backing large scale urbanization as a pathway to economic growth. So this is the policy conundrum, and the finding that sort of feeds into an older debate about how do we deal with migrants. So public policy is a naughty and gnarled subject, and I've learned from my own senior colleagues at CPR that the magic in public policy is in small and incremental changes, and that every conversation with every actor, no matter how important or unimportant they may seem at the time, can be an opportunity to influence mindsets. So really, the advice that I have got is to think about policy in a longer time frame, and really go for every small change that you can make rather than only gun for large scale and sort of momentous or news headline grabbing kind of changes.